Good afternoon, ladies and gents. It's the 17th of July, 2024, and today I'll be providing you with a very high-level overview on shelters, that being fallout shelters mainly. Again, I'll go through some of the slides to sort of try and prevent some of you from falling asleep whilst listening to me. It's going to be it's a lengthy session, but it is an overview. When we're talking about shelters, though, this is going to be along the lines of a bomb shelter, an air raid shelter, nuclear fallout shelters, or bunkers. That kind of that kind of thing. Before starting on shelters, I just want to remind you all of the three main sort of key principles of protecting yourself from radiation, and that's going to be time, distance, and shielding. At all times during an SHTF situation, possibly involving radiation or radioactive fallout, remember to get the hell away from the detonation area or ground zero. So as far away as possible and as quickly as possible. The longer you're away from radiation, the weaker it becomes, and the better that's going to be for you and your family. Also remember to implement shielding where and when possible. So that could be shielding at home, creating a shelter, finding a structurally better sort of building, such as a commercial building to sort of shelter in, building a makeshift camp or den-like shelter at home using furniture, or any sort of other means of shielding and sort of sheltering in. Now we've just got to sit back and just ask ourselves this. We have to sort of firstly understand why we're likely to end up in any kind of shelter in the first place. If the British people end up talking about shelters, then things would have definitely sort of escalated quite a bit here. We've already spoken about how the UK is sort of far enough away from any conflict zone to become, any kind of threat, let's say, from an invading force, tanks or artillery shells. However, that doesn't mean that the UK is immune from any sort of immediate threat. We were attacked actually by the Chinese only a month ago, but in the form of a cyber attack on critical infrastructure. An EMP could be launched from a satellite in space, detonating above the UK, but the more likely threat is going to be, I would say, a missile attack from an enemy submarine just, I don't know, 15 miles off the coast of Great Britain. So whilst that is a threat, or that threat is sort of possible, we have to sort of factor in the use of a nuclear weapon, whether that be a conventional attack or a tactical strike. So when we talk about shelters and bunkers in this session, we're going to be doing so in view of a nuclear attack. Another disclaimer, though, whilst we're talking about that, what a nanny state we live in. But when we talk about nuclear weapons, nuclear attack or nuclear fallout, we're not talking about the end of days, the apocalypse, the end of the world as we know it, or any other madness that may be sort of brewing up in people's minds. My previous video on radiation, that was the one just before this. If you haven't seen it, it talks about nuclear threats, radiation, fallout, protection from radiation and shielding. So I would urge you actually to go and watch that before you watch this one. I've also done a couple of other videos in this playlist that's out there discussing possible threats to the UK and the UK's sort of defence and deterrence. Again, I would recommend actually that you watch those before the radiation one, which was before this. So what I'm trying to say is I've created these first handful or 15, is it 14 or 15 video sessions sequentially, meaning that ideally they should be watched in order from session 1 through to session sort of 15. My purpose for the sequence is because I sort of wanted to lay the foundations out first to those of you that are new to the prepping arena. Or have not kept up with the news, or some people out there suffering from sort of normality or normalcy bias, and or wants a detailed insight to why people around the world, including government officials, are talking about World War III. Oh, and nuclear weapons. These videos are created in order in view of logic, because I kind of tend to look at things logically first. There's no point in sort of understanding what and how shelters work if you haven't sort of prepared any food or water supplies. And there's no point in me sort of telling you what radiation is if you don't know what type of threats are out there and whether or not, you're likely to be living in any kind of danger area or not. So enough of that bollocks, as I'm sort of going off track again. Just a quick scenario. You're at work or you're at home, let's just say either or. And the breaking news sort of hits your mainstream sort of media, whether that's on a device or on the TV. France has just been attacked by a missile, and the immediate analysis states that it's a tactical nuke hitting a radar, communications, and intelligence site. You're immediately going to be asking yourself those critical impact questions again, which you already have some of the answers to. Where was the attack? What type of attack? How big is the impact and how much damage is caused, as well as what's the likely response going to be afterwards? France, as does all other countries, to be fair, share they have a fair share of sort of primary military targets across its country. If you are living in France, then I would jump onto the nuke map website, put these base locations into your sort of nuke map, and then just simulate air and ground sort of burst destinations with around 150 to 200 kiloton warheads. Certainly run through these simulations if you're located in any of these areas. If you have time, if you have time, whenever you have time, in and around work or your daily routine, just try and sort of spend 10 minutes or so on this nuke map. Guys, I've put out 2 videos on how nuke map works and how to use it. I'm going to do one more video for nuke map where we're going to be simulating from beginning to end a detonation on. It's going to be a military installation or a counterforce target here in the UK, and we're going to talk in detail about the risks, the threats, the radiuses, the contours, the damages caused depending on what type of building you're in and where you are in terms of the radius of that detonation. Also, the effects of the fallout cloud and all the rest of it. It's going to be detailed, but I do urge you that if you're living in a different country from the UK, do exactly the same. Just find a list, just Google, jump onto Google and just enter sort of military bases, naval bases, air bases, and whatever else you deem to be a possible target in your sort of home country. Then go through that list and just see if you actually live in any of those areas. If you do, then bring up nuke map and then simulate. Gone off track a little bit here. So back to the France scenario. So you will need to answer some of these questions as soon as possible, because you'll just want to know whether or not there's going to be a fallout cloud. So what I mean is you're going to need to know pretty much from the off whether it was an airburst or ground burst. If it's a ground burst, you're going to have a fallout cloud. If it's an airburst, you're not likely to. If there is, it's not going to be much of one. This would be a high threat to the UK, with French shores only being 26 miles away, as I've said. The question you're probably not going to sort of hang around for is the likely response. The response is not the threat at the moment, and I would sort of be more concerned whether or not the UK is going to be a next target. So with that, it's going to be full steam ahead. You're going to be thinking about your preps, your plan, which will incorporate your food and water, or the other way around. And are you bugging in or bugging out? Now, once you've decided on whether you're bugging in or bugging out, we can start to look at your shelter options. If you believe you're living in a potential danger area, then my guess is that you'll be thinking about bugging out to a safer location, which makes sense, just in case your town becomes a secondary or third target or strike target. If you're not in a sort of potentially dangerous area, then you're probably more likely to sort of be bugging in and staying at home. But what do those 2 terms mean? Well, quite simply, if you're bugging in, then you're normally staying at home. And it's probably going to be the better option, because you're more than likely going to have most of your preps there, or all of your preps there. And you're also going to be familiar with your surroundings. So that's going to be familiar with the people around you, your neighbours, friends and foes, also local resources in terms of reservoirs, rivers and things like that. So you're going to be familiar with those surroundings. Now, some of you lucky people out there will have basements or cellars and a location below sort of ground, well, let's say ground level, because that's going to be better than being above sort of ground, for various reasons that I'll cover in this session. 5 out of 6 surfaces. We're talking about sort of basements and that kind of space. But 5 out of the 6 surfaces, walls, floor, and ceiling of the basement should already be fortified by surrounding walls, earth, and concrete. It will only be the roof of the basement that's going to be more exposed, even with a house on top of it. You're gonna, you're going to be sort of occupying a shelter to protect yourself and those with you from sort of radiation initially. Watch the video before this one where we sort of talk about the dangers and threat of radiation. It's not until you know what radiation is, can you begin to sort of think about the shelters, hence the reason why these first sort of 15 videos should be watched in order. Unfortunately, for me and for many households here in the UK, we don't have the luxury of a basement or cellar or any other room below ground. Because houses by default in this country, certainly the new ones, that don't come with sort of basements or cellars. A lot of the older houses did back in the day, but the newer ones don't. So what is your next option? If you're bugging in, then you're likely to be at home. So how protected are you at home from radioactive fallout? But that all depends on the size of the fallout cloud, obviously, and how far away from your home was the detonation. And also, what was the weather conditions outside? So with southwesterly or northwesterly winds being the prevailing wind sort of direction here in the UK, if the attack or strike was in France to the east, then the risk level comes down quite a bit. Even though France is our neighbouring country, the prevailing winds are more likely to be sort of blowing the fallout cloud eastwards across Europe instead of westwards towards the UK. So I hope that makes sense. However, guys, prevailing winds do change. Needless to say, and regardless to the weather conditions, if you're at home, you're gonna have to sort of fortify your home and or build a makeshift sort of shelter inside your house. If you don't have time, then a makeshift shelter is going to be your only option. You will find the room on the ground floor that is most central to the property, the center of the house, meaning away from all of the external walls. You should then sort of build a kind of camp, or we used to call them dens back in the day when we were kids, but a den-like structure. For example, in the lounge or in your lounge, away from external walls and windows, for all of you to be able to sort of get into or under, let's say, you'll need to sort of create a shield around, around you and the family. So that might mean pulling all of the furniture around you, sort of inwards to kind of create a wall. And then I'd be sort of looking at bringing all of the mattresses from upstairs down to the lounge and just throwing them on top of your den or your structure that you've created in your lounge. I actually struggled, to be honest with you, to find any sort of example pictures online showing sort of makeshift shelters constructed at home using furniture. So what I've done is I've kind of just found a small piece of text to provide you with just some information on what they call it, like a homemade, it's an air raid sort of shelter made out of furniture in your lounge. Like I say, I was actually surprised that there's hardly any information out there on the internet. So what I've done is I've just got a couple of slides here that just kind of give you some information on, the materials that you need and the steps that you should be taking. Again, like I say, we won't talk about too much of this content because this is really just an overview of all shelters. But what you're doing here, guys, you're creating a space between you and the outside world and sort of putting items between sort of you and those external walls as additional shielding. There are many different types of home shelters. You either sort of build properly if you have the time and the resources and money, or if at short notice you can throw together, giving yourself some level of sort of protection. But again, I would urge you to sort of watch the session on radiation because from that, you'll better understand the radioactive threat and also which materials are best used for shielding. I also cover our sort of home shielding plan or my home shielding plan that I'm sort of currently working on and sort of getting together at home at the moment. This will be a little more structured than building a den in the lounge off the fly. That's not to say that we wouldn't do that. It's just because that's always going to be an option. But it just depends on how much shielding you're going to want to create, and that will be determined by the fallout threat and those impact questions. Because the strength of the radiation from the moment of detonation to any time afterwards degrades massively, Meaning, if the radiation outside your home a couple of hours after the detonation is at, let's say, 80% radioactive level, for example, then in 24 to 48 hours afterwards, that level would drop significantly down to around about 10%. So those 10% levels can still be harmful, obviously, but not necessarily life-threatening. So this means that so long as you can stay in a shelter for at least 2 to 4 days, then you've massively increased your chances. But listen, we can definitely do better than that by actually sort of shielding our home. And this would be part of probably your bug-in plan, I would say, with home shielding. I think to make this easier, though, there are many sort of different options to sort of consider when, talking about the different types of shelters. So I'm going to do another or separate video where I'll sort of tell you or show you or provide you with an overview of my bug in and bug out plans, which will include my home shielding plan. So you can see in detail, and then you can kind of look at that and go, okay, that's a good idea, or no, we're not going to need to do that. Again, remember, guys, this information is for you, for you lot also, sort of just take what you need, and then use it, for your own preps. But a long story short, if I've sort of decided on whether sort of to bug in or bug out, then those immediate impact questions, I've had to sort of ask myself have prompted me to make the appropriate decisions. If there's a direct attack on the UK, and it's either a counter force or counter value target quite close to this location, then I'll have to sort of ask myself this question: what level of radioactive fallout are we likely to be hit with? And is my home going to provide me and my family with enough protection? Those are the questions, yeah. And from those answers, I'll know whether I'm staying or going. It's as simple as that. That's as logic as it gets. So you just need to make sure that you can ask yourself the right questions, find the right answers to those questions as quickly as possible, and then make a decisive decision for the safety of you and your family. If you're bugging in, then I have a home shielding plan, like I've just said, which will be triggered immediately. My home shielding plan involves sandbags for windows and door recesses, the blocking of all sort of vents, fans, the chimney stack, and the list sort of goes on from there. So various bugging items will come down from the loft here. And then it's all hands on deck. Each member of the family will have their own tasks and duties to fulfill, and then that's it. It's all systems go. Our bug out plan has simply been sort of created to find a location in terms of a building type, that is, that we feel that would sort of provide us with better protection. Sorry, excuse me, better protection than that of the family home. We would sort of prepare to sort of bug out for a week. But obviously, the timescales are going to depend on those immediate impact questions again. I've actually identified two different locations or buildings. They're commercial buildings, actually, but still, I'm still working them out at the moment to whether they're going to be viable or not. So I'm still I'm still surveying these locations and just trying to put myself into these locations and see if they're going to be better than me staying here in a home that is shielded. Moving away from my plans, all you guys have to sort of understand are the radioactive dangers and how best to sort of protect yourself from that contaminant. So to be honest, though, if we're making decisions on bugging in or bugging out, then life as we know it will change for a bit, certainly here in the UK, if we're talking about it. And the only thing on your mind is going to be survival for a period of time, and the impact such as, I don't know, there's going to be the impact on the economies after all of this has happened. But that's going to be the least of your problems, to be honest with you. Moving on. Countries will be on a sort of war footings, if not already on one, and everyone's sort of emotions will be all over the place. Listen, guys, I can't prepare anyone's mind for any such event, but what I can do is sort of provide you with information and advice to sort of help prepare your sort of mental state if and when an SHTF situation starts. Your biggest threat before panic buyers will be the normality bias, which starts with you. With that bias, you are your nearest and closest threat, to be honest. That's going to be the closest threat to yourself. That's going to be you. Meaning, if you're going through life either not paying attention, ignoring what's happening, or just simply pretending that I'm all right, Jack, nothing's going to happen to me, kind of nonsense, then you are an immediate threat to yourself and those that you're responsible for. Then out from there, your next closest threat will be the very people around you, those in the street, at work, your neighbours, etc. When the SHTF kicks off and panic sort of kicks in, we're all, to be fair, guys, listen, we all want life to sort of carry on as normal, don't we? But without all of the conflict sort of kicking off around the world, and to be honest with you, if we're all talking about World War One kicking off today, because history hadn't sort of experienced any previous world wars, then that would actually be harder to imagine. Pretty much everyone would be normalcy bias. And that would be because, we'd not have had those two world wars that we've already had. If anything, we need to sort of try and learn from both of those wars. Like I say, guys, we have already had two world wars. So this is not new. It's going to be new to sort of me and you, because we probably haven't experienced it in our lifetimes. But there's already been two world wars over the last 150 years. There are a number of other options at home that you can sort of consider. You can dig and build an expedient fallout shelter in your back garden. You are effectively sort of going underground. You're creating those 5 out of 6 surfaces or walls, providing you with all that good thickness and shielding from the earth around you. So as long as you can sort of dig enough, and you have at least, I think they say sort of 3 foot of earth above you to make, some kind of makeshift roof, then that's good. And it's probably better than your den or your camp-like structure in the lounge, or, wherever it is in your home. But then that also depends on the size of your home. I will cover these sort of garden and outside shelters in a separate video in more detail. These fallout shelters, they can be built to many different sort of specifications. However, there are sort of critical items you're going to have to sort of factor into your design, from sleeping arrangements and seating to sanitation and cleaning facilities. So before any of that, you'll need to sort of make sure that you have ventilation and that shelter is safe. You don't want to sort of be in a shelter 9 feet deep asleep and the walls decide to sort of collapse in on all of you. Shelters is another big subject, like I've said, so I won't go into too much detail on this, and this is just going to be an overview. Expedient shelters are shelters, they say, that can be built within 8 hours, or an 8-hour period. Can be built quickly and locally to provide you with some level of protection, if nothing else is sort of available. A good start for the Expedient shelters would be one dug into the ground, sort of taking you below ground level. Personally, if you're sort of given 8 hours to dig one of these, then that is definitely a challenge. Obviously easier if there's more of you digging it. But then if there's more people, then does that mean it has to be a bigger shelter to cater for more people, if that makes sense? If you're anywhere near the blast contours or radiuses, then underground is by far the safest place, to be, really, to sort of, it's going to be to avoid that initial explosion and blast. If you are in sort of buildings in those areas, then yeah, you're not in a good place necessarily, because there's every possibility that those buildings are going to sort of either be taken down within seconds or going to be set alight. You can build a do-it-yourself shelter at home in the basement or in another room in the house. This is not made sort of using furniture and mattresses, as I sort of pointed out earlier, but instead it's sort of built using building materials. So, you can build a fortified brick or concrete room within your basement or cellar, similar to an Expedient shelter dug in the ground back in the garden. But this one is above ground and would have no doubt sort of taken you longer time, effort, and everything else to sort of build than your 8-hour window, for your makeshift. Nevertheless, though, the basement on its own is good. But to have additional sort of walls within that basement is going to be excellent protection for you lot. All you need to think about is survival and making sure that you're not contaminated by that radioactive fallout. You can keep yourselves alive which will be accomplished through obviously your water, your food, and your medications, as and when they're sort of needed. If you have to protect yourself from others, that's other people, then guys, you're going to do that by whatever means possible and whatever you've got at your disposal. If you're in the US, you're likely to be able to pull out a firearm, and people are going to turn around and run away. Here in the UK, that's a little bit different. We can't get away with doing that. The question is always going to be around the time, how long is this shit going to be going on for? We'll also be covering personal protection and fortification on a separate video as well. Okay, guys, so I'm not going to go into that either at the moment on this. Moving on, if you have the money and time, then there's quite a bit more to consider when you're building your shelter. So if you've got the money and resource and you've got the time and you're going to create a proper design and all the rest of it, then there are sort of considerations that you can probably focus more on. You will have to sort of make sure that the size caters for all members of your family or group. Can everyone sort of stand up or sit down and go to sleep in, as well as some sort of communal space if you've got the space for that. You will need to factor in these elements into your design. That being storage, ventilation, sanitation, power, and also some kind of sort of well, it's going to be a light source of some sorts. Making sure that you can sort of cook and prepare food. You'll need to ensure that it's waterproof and structurally safe to inhabit. Obviously, you cannot sort of have a shelter sort of filling up with water when it rains, and you'll need to sort of make sure that there's at least 2 entrances to your shelter, just in case there's a fire in there. The super rich, lucky buggers are sort of having bunkers built under all of their properties around the world. They're purchasing land in countries such as New Zealand and any other sort of remote islands are sort of less likely to be affected by sort of nuclear war or radioactive sort of fallout. So these structures are huge, costing them sort of anywhere between 500,000 to 5 million plus. How the other half live, eh? The more I think about this, though, guys, the more I want to sort of design and build a shelter in my garden. I'm seriously thinking about this. I'm definitely, it's definitely an option. In terms of storage, you're going to need quite a bit of this for water and for food, medical supplies, tools, clothes, sanitation and hygiene goods, communication and protection items, and the list goes on. Of course, you're not going to have a walking fucking wardrobe or anything like that, or some of you will do if you're super rich. But you get what I'm talking about. Ensuring that the shelter has enough space for you all, so that you're not sort of too claustrophobic, and hopefully sort of depending on the severity of the incident, you won't have to sort of stay in that shelter for too long. If you have your house shielded to a degree as well, then at some point you're going to be able to sort of leave that shelter and go back into your home, which is going to be more comfortable, a little bit more spacious, and maybe more amenities than that of the shelter. But just a couple of points to highlight here when we're talking about shelters. Space is likely to be at a premium, whether that be sort of indoors or outside underground in a shelter. The key points to consider from the off are going to be ventilation through the shelter. That's going to be closely followed by sanitation. These 2 points are critical for your health and for your morale, for the morale of yourself and the group or the family. Let's say, for instance, it's warm outside, so it's a summer, it's a summer day, and you're all in the house, with all of the windows and doors sealed up, shielded up, and sandbags and everything in the recesses. Then that's likely to get uncomfortable quite quickly. If there's no electricity also, then you've got no use of an AC or fans, so they're sort of out of the question. Your sanitation requirements are pivotal, okay, in terms of your hygiene and health as well as the morale. You will definitely have to sort of consider these 2 points pretty much closely, but not far behind water and food. Without water and food, it won't matter if you're in a shelter that smells of shit and you can't get rid of the smell due to not having any ventilation. But listen, guys, I'll cover these points in more detail, sort of, on a video, sort of specific to certain shelter sort of types. As this is going to be just an overview of different types of shelters. Back in the day, there used to be what they called the 1963 sanitation kits for shelters, and that contained a supply for 25 people with sanitation items to last either 2 or 4 weeks. I think there was two different size packs. The types of items that you'd find in there would be a commode seat, a can opener, napkins or sanitary napkins, hand cleaners and gloves, water dispensing spouts, cups and lids, commode chemicals, and sort of tissue paper and things like that, which I actually think is quite cool, to be honest, but I don't think they do sort of anything quite like that anymore. Um, but when you sort of come back out of the shelter, guys, believe me, this is not going to be the end of your crisis. You're going to be saying to yourself, when will the water and the gas and electricity be coming back on? But before those questions are answered, we're going to be sort of asking, believe it or not, more important questions like, where the fuck is everyone else? You know, how much damage has been caused? Is it actually safe to be walking around outside? And are we actually in danger of being attacked by, our so-called sort of friendly neighbours? Two main key principles to sort of keep hold of is your water and your food supplies. Where are they? Do we have enough? Can we get any more if we run low? And are we able to sort of protect our supplies from those, now desperate sort of people around you? Remember, all those friendly neighbours who quickly, they're going to go through the same sort of experience for many of them. So they're likely to quickly become a threat. And sad to say, but that's reality. That's it. That's exactly what's going to happen. Any outsiders also, so these are not the people that you're used to talking to in the pub or walking the dog. Any of these outsiders from other areas are likely to be roaming around, wanting to sort of take their chances. Because remember, guys, depending on the severity of the SHTF, will determine the levels of desperation, anxiety, panic, fear, and terror amongst everyone around you. Again, I'll be covering that subject on sort of personal protection in another video. For now, let's just stick with the shelters. In terms of your water, food, and your supplies, I would say start off preparing for 1 week. When you have that, then sort of prepare for another week. So 2 weeks worth of preps, then a month, and then so on from there. Start this journey. If you haven't started, start it now, today. If you are completely new to all of this, just continue to watch these videos, not just on this channel, other channels, and just get an idea and get a feel of the threats, the likelihood, the possibilities. Okay, don't stop overcommitting or even committing yourself to something that you actually don't believe in. But I promise you, once you have just 1 week's worth of preps, you will feel a whole lot better, guaranteed. It will become sort of infectious though, because excuse me, because the more you do, the more you want to sort of learn and prepare for. For me, although I'm sort of not working just yet, my prepping hasn't stopped. I'm creating this video content to start with. I'm sharing some information, and as I do so, I'm continuing to sort of learn. And with that, I'm preparing mentally. Become stronger upstairs in your minds, ladies and gents, and you will go a long way during any or many sort of SHTF situations. Guys, if I thought that there was going to be a nuclear war, or a nuclear war was imminent, then I'd be in the back garden today with a shovel and digging to start making a fallout shelter. That goes without saying. I'll keep looking out the window and into that garden, and I'll find myself sort of contemplating whether or not I should just get started. I know once I start, that's it. I'll be committed. But again, I'm sort of surfing the web and I'm sort of looking at news and articles. I'm filtering out all that crap and I'm making an assessment on what I should, really be sort of thinking about and doing. It's going to take me quite a long time to do. And it's probably that sort of thought alone, I think, that's sort of keeping me from getting started. But if this conflict between the Ukraine and Russia spills over into any European country, then that will be my cue to get started. I'll be digging. If there is a tactical strike or any strike on a European country from Russia, that's it. From the moment I hear that news, I will be digging. In the meantime, though, I can start the design on paper because I don't want to just start digging a hole. So I'd like I say, the whole purpose of preparing is being prepared up front. So if I can get a design and just see if it's feasible, see how long it's going to take me, what resources are needed, as opposed to just going off. The last thing you want to be doing is panicking. Okay, you need to avoid that at all costs, even if it if it's panicking when building a or digging a shelter. You just need to make sure that you're factoring all of those points that I've sort of just pointed out. So the ventilation, the sanitation, the space, the two exits, all the rest of it. And by the way, it's not going to cost me anything to start digging a fuck off big hole in my garden, is it? To improve your chances of surviving a nuclear attack, your primary need would be an adequate shelter equipped for many sort of days occupancy, ideally. A shelter that affords good protection against fallout radiation and the weather conditions encouraging sort of fallout to your area would be adequate in, let's say, more than 95% of areas here in the UK. However, even in, I suppose, almost all areas not endangered by the blast and fire during a massive sort of nuclear attack, the fallout protection provided by most existing buildings would not be adequate enough either. If the winds blew from the wrong direction during the time of the fallout deposition, and then of course it all depends on sort of how close you are to that ground zero. So just think about the concept of shielding your home. Look at the plan, have a plan, what's involved, and can you have, can you have that shielding process in sort of pre-staged, should we say? That's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be using sandbags. Although it won't be sand, it will be earth that will be dug up from my garden and put into sandbags. It's going to be compact and tied off, and then those sandbags are going to be stacked in my garden somewhere. So if the shit hits the fan, then all we've got to do is just pick up the sandbags and just fill the recesses in terms of the doors and windows recesses in the house. Okay, moving on. To remain in or near cities, or other sort of possible target areas, one would need to sort of better protect against blast, fire, and fallout than is sort of provided by most sort of shelters and buildings. Blast tests have proved that earth-covered expedient fallout shelters described earlier can survive blast effects severe enough to demolish most homes. So if you've got one of these expedient sort of shelters or dugouts in your garden and you're in a blast area, you could find that you'd go into the shelter, come up after a day or so, and your house is blown down. So that's what that means. It just means that, if you're below ground in a blast area, then, something underground is going to be it's going to be safer than anything above ground. Hence one of the reasons why, I'm sort of thinking of building one. I don't believe actually that we're in one of those areas, but with our own shelter, we would not have to sort of contemplate bugging out. However, bugging out plans are nearly sort of in place for us because I haven't got a shelter. So, like I say, look at the options, what's feasible, what can you do, and what do you want to do? What can you afford to do? Everyone's situation is going to be different. We're all living in different areas. We've all got different types of houses. We've all got different amounts of money in the bank that's disposable or not, and different size families and everything else. Okay, so we're all different. I have sort of made calculations using the potential counterforce and counter value targets that I've identified here in the UK. And from that list, along with sort of running nuclear attack simulations using NukeMap, I feel that we're not in a direct danger area, location or area. I urge you guys, though, to do the same. I've covered this in a previous video on sort of how to run the simulations and assessments, but if you spend just sort of 20 minutes making this calculation based on where you live in whichever country, then from that, you'll know if you're in a danger area from a blast or whether you're at risk from a fallout cloud. Guys, if you're not living in the UK and instead somewhere in Europe, I'll apologise because I just haven't provided you with sort of possible counterforce or counter-value targets in your country. To create a list of possible targets in your country, just simply Google military bases, airfields and naval bases or other sort of establishments. Create your list and then just see if you live in any of those areas. If you do, then simulate a nuclear detonation on that base, not on your house. Okay, so on NukeMap, make sure that detonation is above the base. Check the prevailing winds for your country and assess whether or not you're in a danger area. That's it. Once you've got that information, you can then decide on whether or not you should be bugging in or bugging out, and then what type of shelter is needed for such an event. Moving away from your home for a second, though, you might have, let's say you might have the best shelter possible located at home. But that's going to be no good if you're not at home when the SHTF kicks off. If this happens, whatever that might be, and wherever that might be, it's going to be when we're probably not expecting it, and many people will be completely caught off guard. I mean, I'll be completely caught off guard regardless, even if anyone who's even fully prepared will be caught off guard, because I think in the back of most people's minds, there's still, not expecting this to happen, even if it's only 0.5%. Okay, because unless you've gone through it, you're not going to expect it. If you're prepared, then you'll have plans for everyone in the house, hopefully. And that would hopefully include plans on sort of how to get back to the house. If that SHTF happens, when sort of everyone's around or out. So listen, guys, what I'm trying to say is you could have a family of 5, 4 of them could be at home, and I could be off at work. You need to have a plan in place on if that happens. Just because we're sort of talking about this doesn't mean that life stops, guys. Tomorrow you're all going to be getting up and sort of going off to work. The kids are going to get up and go to school if they're not on holiday, and you'll all be getting on, with your business as normal. But what I'm trying to say is, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute this should be taking over your lives or anything like that. Just maybe just be interested in what's going on around you in terms of possible threats to you and your family. That's it, really. Just a quick scenario. I'm just going to give you two, and I just want you to place yourself in this situation and then just think about what you would be doing. Okay, these are very quick. These are very sort of short. So if you're not at home when this all goes off, you'll need to know what to do. Firstly, if you leave the house every day to go to work, be familiar with your surroundings at work, and also familiar with the route that you take. How long is the journey, and are there any sort of alternative routes to work? I'm saying this because many people won't be at home if this sort of pops off during the day. So depending on how much time you have will determine whether or not you're going to have enough time to get home. Answers to those immediate impact questions will be needed, and from that, you should be able to sort of calculate how much time you have. The other scenario, let's say you're not going to make it home in time. Then what do? So you're at work, okay? So hence the reason why I said familiarize yourself with your surroundings in, any areas away from home where you sort of spend a lot of time. So it might not necessarily, might not necessarily be work. It could be school, or if you spend a lot of time elsewhere, or whatever it is, just familiarize yourself with those areas, because you're going to have to sort of identify a safe building or location to shelter in if you've got no time. Familiarize yourself with the buildings, their structures and design. And why is this important? Because different types of buildings will offer you different levels of protection. So before we go down that road, we also have to sort of ask ourselves that question again. What are the sheltering options for you? And what are you actually sheltering against? Has there already been a strike and you're sheltering because of fallout, or are you expecting a second strike and you're shelter from, or you're going to be sheltering from a blast output of some sorts? So, are you in a danger area as well? Your house might not be, but your work might be. Many questions you're going to have to ask yourself, and are questions that you should sort of be asking yourselves now, not when the shit hits the fan. So when the SHTF kicks off and you've not sort of assessed your surroundings beforehand, and you've not taken stock of the possible shelters around you, you're not familiar with the alternative routes home because the one you normally take is now sort of banged out with panic drivers on the roads, trying to sort of get it out of town or wherever it is they're going. So a high rise or a building with multiple floors is a good start. And it's even better if there's a basement, but multi-level structures in a blast zone might not be so good. You don't want to be in a basement also. in those areas, because you could have an entire building collapse on top of you during the blast, that is, on a local strike. Hence the reason, guys, why it's important to know whether or not you're either living or working in a danger area. When I say danger area, again, we've covered this on Nuke Map, but I'm going to have a detailed Nuke Map session where we look at this in more detail. A danger area in terms of the contours and the radiuses, what damage will be caused at different distances from the explosion sort of location or point, shall we say. So then if the airbase is 4 miles away, then this is where you should be going, below ground or above ground. If it's 10 miles away from, if your work location is 10 miles away from the airbase that's likely to get hit, then can you get away with a 2-story, a 12-story building, or should you be in the basement? Do you know what I mean? So that's what I'm trying to say about these danger areas and just knowing whether you're in one or not. So you're at work in an 8-story building. This is the scenario, yeah? And there is a basement where they keep the archive documents and all that kind of shit. There is a US air base 35 miles away from you. So that's from your workplace. So you're sat at work at the moment, okay? You're at your desk. And there is a US airbase 35 miles away. And across the mainstream, you hear that there's been an airburst kind of attack on the base. You live, so this is your home. Your home is 15 miles away in the opposite direction. So that's the opposite direction to the blast. And you believe that the rest of your family are at home. There are 3 different routes to get home by car. That's going to be a motorway, an A road, and then there is a longer route across country. Firstly, the immediate impact questions. What do you know about the attack? We know that it's a counter-value target, so that's military. It's an airburst missile, which is detonated above the base, and is estimated that there's going to be fatalities in the region of 3,000 to 5,000. The weather outside is mild to moderate. The wind direction southwesterly at 7 miles per hour, and we're in the UK. The unprepared person will see the news feed, will walk around the office for about 20 minutes talking to other colleagues about what's just happened. Others will be getting on the phone, calling people that they feel might be nearer that area. Others might be online trying to get some more information. While some will just be sat there at their desk looking around at other people walking around and talking, wondering what the fuck's going on. Most of them won't know what an airburst is, and they won't know the dangers that poses. No one will see the significance of the location's distance from your location. Many would not have identified alternative routes back home from work, and now we're 30 minutes into the incident. Most of them will still be at work talking about what's just happened. A prepper, on the other hand, would have spent a couple of minutes tops checking online for sort of information on those impact questions for clarity. You'll then be contacting your family and all your group members, making sure firstly that they're aware of what's happened, and then to confirm sort of where everyone is, and then instructing everyone to sort of trigger your action plans. So once you as a prepper have the information you need, you're then going to be sort of checking your sat nav and traffic reports as you make your way to your car. Within 5 to 10 minutes of that strike happening, you're on your way home via the best or sort of quickest route possible. Remember though, you're traveling, or you're going to be traveling if you're going home away from the impact zone, and you're already sort of 35 miles away. So I wouldn't expect too much in the way of panic on the road, but you just never know. I've gone off track a little bit here, and it's okay. I'm sort of talking about shelters, but you may not sort of have access to a shelter that you have sort of prepared at home, and that's the purpose of this. I'm just trying to, because listen, if you get caught off guard and you're not at home, and that is likely, and all your preps and everything's at home, then the shit starts from that moment onwards. So you need to sort of factor these these key points into your plan. So, just make sure that you've got a plan on whether you're bugging in to a building in your local area, making sure that you identify the safest building, and the checklist goes on from there. Just a quick note on the sort of building types quickly. So a one-story building, a wood framed, with a basement of some sort is going to offer you very minimal protection. Wood frame buildings aren't, they're not going to be as good as a brick building. As we pointed out on the sort of radiation and shielding session, if this is all that's available, then into the basement it is, which will provide you with, a little more protection than, let's say, being stood outside. If you're in a two-story brick building with a basement, then protection here is going to be a little bit better. If you're in the basement, that is. And this is a common structure, but it's not common structure. Two-story brick buildings is common in this country, but without the basements. So a three-story brick building, shall we say, which we call them townhouses here in the UK, will provide you with a little more protection, especially if you're in the basement. However, if there isn't a basement, then you'll need to get off the ground floor and reside on the second floor, not the third floor. Radiation will land on the roofs of the buildings first, so stay away from the roof, and radiation settles on the ground outside around the buildings. So get off the ground floor. Hope that makes sense. Buildings that are going to sort of provide you with a better protection are going to be sort of buildings with multiple floors, office, sort of commercial or domestic buildings. And if there's a basement as well, then that's even better. If you're in a 10-story building, then make your way to the third floor and get to the center of the floor away from all external all external walls and windows. This is where you're going to be most protected from fallout. And if there's a basement, then that's even better. Get yourself down there. I may have already sort of mentioned this previously, but I'm on the lookout for such structures local to me, just in case those sort of impact questions deem my house to not sort of provide adequate protection for me and the family. So obviously, many of you are sort of going to be asking this question, and that is, how are you just sort of walking into these commercial or domestic buildings or getting into them? Firstly, if there's been a nuclear strike on a base 30, 40, 50 miles away from your home, then the people in those buildings, one would expect to have all gone home and not to return until it's safe to do so. How you get into that building is up to you. But let me tell you this, if the shit hits the fan and you want to protect your family and yourself, then all bets are off. Now, I'm not suggesting, guys, for 1 minute that, anyone should be sort of going out there breaking the rules or getting themselves into trouble. You might find that these buildings actually stay open anyway to provide shelter and protection for some people. I don't know if government and local councils or whatever districts have those war plans in place where there are certain buildings that would open to the general public for sheltering purposes. But regardless, I'm just sort of telling you, that if I'm going to be sort of protecting my family, then I will do that by any means possible. One of the buildings I have found is actually an 8-story building. It was built in the 1950s, I believe. It has a basement and is no longer occupied, meaning that it's kind of boarded up and it's not in use. My only problem with this is that it could be knocked down at any time, just to make way for a new development. So there is a second location, again, a commercial building, and that's also not occupied. The only issue I have with this sort of design, which represents is kind of a structure similar to a warehouse unit. So it's going to be hundreds of thousands of square meters in terms of the footprint, but I just don't know if there's enough or whether it would sort of provide adequate protection, to be honest with you. It's a big open space, and although there's a roof very high up, I'm just not sure whether or not the radiation would sort of penetrate that roof and then contaminate the people on the ground. So although there's a big distance between the floor and the roof is fairly thin. So I just don't know how. I'm not greatly familiar with radioactive behaviours, so I need to understand that first to deem this location, adequate or not. If away from home and you're nearer to the impact location, then it's going to be imperative that you familiarize yourself with your surroundings and you identify a shelter for yourself. If it's too dangerous to sort of go home, that is, your family and or group members will all have, well, they're going to have to be sort of familiar with those plans that you've got in place so that they can sort of implement those measures if you're not there. On top of this, if you're sort of away from home, other sort of times more than not, as a prepper, you'll more than likely be carrying some kind of bug out bag in your car. And you probably might be carrying also a get home bag, which is similar to a bug out bag, only its contents, will be sort of founded to help you aid you in sort of getting back home. This could include items such as a paper map, a compass, just in case you have to sort of move on foot. Enough food and water for the period of time it's going to take you to get home. I'm not going to go through all that now, as there's a separate session on its way soon in relation to bug in, bug out, get out bags, get home bags, and that kind of stuff. There are people building bunkers all across the world at the moment, especially across Europe right now. Whether that be in your backyard or out in the field somewhere, the same principles apply. You'll be digging a hole big enough for you and your family to reside in. And it needs to be fortified and provide you with all of the supplies, services, and utilities needed to get you through the initial threat periods. The problem always is that, we don't know we know what the threat is, but we don't know the timescales. And that's always going to be against us. Guys, we're just about done. I'm just going to rattle off a quick summary, and then, for you, that's it. So just to recap, building a quick makeshift shelter in your lounge at home using furniture and such like to offer you a level of protection. Then, taking it one step further, you can shield your home or have the shielding materials ready and waiting to put in place if needed. We covered the aspects of you building a shelter in your home. This could be a brick, concrete, or timber structure sort of built, I don't know, inside the basement, or it could be built in a spare room in a house somewhere. Moving on from that, you can either build a structure outside in the garden above ground, but thick enough to sort of provide you with a good level of protection, or better still, you could dig a hole in the garden or on some land somewhere and just build a shelter that is below ground level. Again, it depends on whether you're in a danger area and whether you want that source site in your garden. Like I say, it's probably going to be better to do it underground. Some of the types of buildings you can look for as bug out or secondary shelters could be office blocks or older commercial buildings built with sort of thick walls and normally have basements. If you're living in some of the cities around the world, an instant go-to place for many is going to be the underground in the underground tube network or similar metro network systems. Other countries, especially some of those closer to the enemy's border, may find that there are sort of local fallout shelters specifically built for residents that they can sort of get themselves into. Remember, if you have time on your hands and you've answered those sort of impact questions quickly, you might find yourself sort of driving to get away from the danger and then using your vehicle as a shelter. So again, if you're out of the danger area, then your car can be a shelter if you can't get anywhere else. If you're on the coast or anywhere near water, you might be lucky enough to own a boat, and then you could sort of travel during an SHTF sort of situation. You can jump in the boat and just sail out to sea. Just get away from the danger. As long as you've got your supplies on board, you're good to go. There's no likelihood of any traffic jams or any of those kinds of obstacles out at sea. You just go in a direction and that's it. All good. Now, that's it, guys. There's going to be sort of many other options. Just make sure that you're aware of them, and more importantly, you've factored them into your plans. I'm going to leave it there for now, and we'll sort of do more videos on shelters for you because it's a big subject. There's a lot of different types, and there is a lot of important information that you don't just go off with your shovel and start digging a hole. There's a lot to factor in. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. I'll let you get on, and I'm off.